From Louisiana's news channel, this is 9 News at 6.
Good evening, I'm George Sells.
And I'm Donna Britt. A police pursuit in Gonzales has many of you just talking away this evening.
You've been weighing in on WAFP's Facebook page since we first reported the story at noon. A Gonzales police officer tried to stop an SUV for speeding. A chase followed, and when it ended, the officer discovered the vehicle he'd been after was filled with off-duty police officers, including top brass. Tonight, we hear from the top cop himself. Here's the ITeam's Chawla with her investigation, Chasing the Chief.
It was a celebration to say farewell to one of their own.
We all met at the police department, and we loaded in the same vehicle and traveled to Baton Rouge.
Gonzales Police Chief Sherman Jackson was just one of the 7 Gonzales PD officers in a privately owned SUV headed to the capital city for a night out at Sullivan's, a restaurant and lounge.
Were you guys drinking?
I can't speak for anyone else. I can tell you that I had probably 2 beers throughout a 5-hour period.
The night was fine until the trip back to Gonzales.
1:30, dispatch, 27 stop.
It was 1:36 a.m., a Friday morning, November 18th, a week before Thanksgiving last year. A Gonzales police officer is running radar near St. Elizabeth's Hospital on Highway 30. He'd later write in his notes, a 2003 Ford SUV whizzed past him at a high rate of speed, clocked going 65 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. From there, the chase was on.
LA 30 is iron solid.
The officer got behind the SUV as the driver headed down Burnside Avenue into the heart of Gonzales. The driver, who had slowed down to 45 miles an hour, did not stop. In his report, the officer wrote, "I activated my emergency lights and sirens on my fully marked police vehicle." The I-Team obtained copies of police dispatch audio tapes.
Several. We're still north town, Burnside.
All while Chief Jackson says he and everyone else inside that SUV being chased thought it was a prank.
We looked at one of the guys who was texting on the phone, and we all thought he had set it up to get stopped.
Police reports obtained by the I-Team shows officers were going to various locations to assist with the traffic stop. One notes in his report he performed a U-turn on Burnside, flipped on lights and sirens, and began to call the pursuit. At one point, you can hear tires squeal. Another officer advises dispatch the driver inside the privately owned SUV is not alone.
Vehicle I caught multiple times. Burnside Circle K.
It was one of our officers that we recognized who was at the office with all of us while we was getting prepared to leave, waiting for people to show up to leave. So there again, we thought he was in on it because he knew we were all together.
Yet another officer on duty who notes in his report, "I was traveling a high rate of speed to cut off the pursuit," offers to set up spike strips to puncture the SUV's tires.
I'm going to try to get up to 61 so that spike still on.
But the driver of the SUV would soon change course, heading toward East Ascension High School.
Going eastbound Worthy.
And then another turn.
Going northbound Irma.
The officer with the road spikes has repositioned and notes in his report he began blocking the roadway for safety.
I'm Cornview Worthy, Cornview and Irma.
Now I seen some lights down at the end of Worthy at Prepare, and that's when I said, "Well, guys, this not a prank. I think they for real."
And that's when the driver of the SUV pulled into the parking lot of Gonzales City Hall. The pursuing officer wrote in his notes, he then got a phone call from his sergeant telling him, quote, "Hey man, that's us. Kenny's driving." The driver of the SUV was Gonzales Police Sergeant Kenny Stell.
And he had not been drinking?
No.
Okay.
He don't drink alcohol.
The pursuing officer wrote in his police report, 3 of the officers approached his vehicle laughing, saying they thought we were escorting them to the office. He says one of the officers then told him, quote, "Man, y'all ain't got no life." With the chase over and the SUV stopped, the pursuing officer wrote, "No further actions taken."
Were any of you guys ticketed?
No.
If I am doing 65 in a 40 or 45 and you pull me over, am I going to get a ticket?
Well, it'll be up to that officer who makes a stop. We allow them to use discretion in many cases.
As for no tickets being issued,
Professional courtesy is one thing. This wasn't a professional courtesy issue. He had the right to do his job if he wanted to. In our view, we perceived it as a prank. But in hindsight, yeah, you know, I tell you this: if we were in anybody else's jurisdiction, immediately we would have stopped.
I asked the chief what disciplinary actions, if any, were taken. I was told this is an internal situation and that he did give the driver of the SUV an oral reprimand by counseling him, saying he should have just pulled over. Now, you can also find the full incident report on our website, WAFB.com. For the 9 News I-Team, I'm Chawla.
Many of you have expressed outrage on social media today about a group of 7 off-duty Gonzales police officers, including the chief of police, who failed to stop for a traffic violation. Tonight, people on the streets of Gonzales are weighing in. Here's some background, though, on this 9 News I-Team investigation. A Gonzales police officer running radar on Highway 30 last November says he clocked an SUV speeding 20 miles over the limit just before 2 in the morning. He got behind the vehicle with lights and sirens and tried to get the driver to stop. Several other Gonzales police officers joined in the pursuit, which stretched nearly 3 miles. One officer even deployed spike strips. The chief says the group was returning from a Baton Rouge restaurant and thought their fellow on-duty officers were just playing around.
In our view, we perceived it as a prank. But in hindsight, yeah, you know, I tell you this: if we were in anybody else's jurisdiction, immediately we would have stopped.
Police Sergeant Kenny Stell was driving the private vehicle. Besides the chief, 5 other police officers were in the car. No tickets were issued. The chief says the off-duty police sergeant who was driving had not been drinking. He says he gave that sergeant an oral reprimand.
Now, the chief of police in Gonzales is elected to office and not appointed by the mayor, as in some cities. Nonetheless, the mayor of Gonzales tells WAFB's Kelsey Davis he plans to sit down with the chief to talk about how this pursuit was handled. It's new at 10.
130, dispatch, 27, stop.
The 9 News I-Team's Karen Chawla first reported on the Gonzales police pursuit. Karen asked Chief Sherman Jackson about the allegation the off-duty police sergeant was clock speeding 20 miles over the speed limit.
If I am doing 65 in a 40 or 45 and you pull me over, am I going to get a ticket?
Well, it'll be up to that officer who makes a stop. We allow them to use discretion in many cases.
Gonzales Mayor Barney Arsenault weighed in on an incident he says is a poor reflection on a great police department.
Should they have stopped the vehicle that night? Yes, absolutely should have stopped the vehicle. Anytime a police officer comes up behind you and red lights, blue lights, whatever it may be, I think you should stop your vehicle.
Chief Jackson says they didn't stop their SUV because they thought their fellow officers were pulling a prank on them. But Gonzales residents say there is no excuse for their behavior that night.
It makes me angry that, you know, they have the privilege to do what they want to do and not us.
I think the police department needs a little more training. That I would have stopped, you know, with lights going. It's the way it is. They should have pulled over. Something's wrong with somebody's thinking.
Mayor Arsenault says his next step is to sit down with Chief Jackson to figure out what he and the other officers were thinking and to ensure that this never happens again.
I certainly will talk to the chief. He's a friend of mine. He's doing a good job overall, and I'm sure he hates that this did take place.
Kelsey Davis, WAFB 9 News.
You can read the full incident report on our website, WAFB.com.